40 million people drink from the Colorado River. 5.5 million acres of farmland run on it. Together, they support a $60 billion agricultural economy so large that, measured as a sovereign nation, it would rank 7th in the world. None of that is the immediate paradox. The paradox is that the whole financial architecture holding this system up, the farm loans, the irrigation bonds, the land valuations, sits on a math error made in 1922. That error is already being corrected, and the first structural failure of the Colorado River Basin will not look like an empty riverbed. It will show up as downgraded bond ratings on irrigation districts, rising delinquency rates at community banks, and a regional credit system that starts failing before the reservoirs do. The core mistake started in the 1922 Colorado River Compact. Its negotiators split the basin into an upper division and a lower division, and handed 7.5 million acre-feet annually to each. They used a stretch of abnormally wet years to set the numbers, and ignored the paleoclimate record entirely. Tree ring reconstructions now show that the megadrought gripping the basin is the most severe arid period in at least 1,200 to 1,800 years. Between 2000 and 2021, the Colorado delivered its lowest sustained flows in more than a century of instrumental records. That decline is not abstract anymore. Total system reservoir storage has dropped to 39% of capacity, forcing the first ever federal shortage declarations. Climate change alone has stripped roughly 20% of the river's historical volume. That missing water is not just disappearing into the air, it is moving straight into the balance sheets of agricultural operators, irrigation districts, and the regional lenders tied to them. To see why, you have to rewind to how water became a financial asset. Engineered irrigation in the region predates the United States by centuries. Ancestral Puebloans at Mesa Verde were building stone masonry check dams and water basins, capable of storing 25,000 gallons, as early as 550 AD. Hispanic settlers in the San Luis Valley created the People's Ditch in 1852, the oldest continuous irrigation system in Colorado. But Anglo expansion changed the legal logic completely. Colorado's 1876 Constitution enshrined the doctrine of prior appropriation. First in time, first in right. That turned water rights into something that could be bought, sold, and inherited, as long as the water went to beneficial use. One legal rule transformed water from a shared necessity into a tradable asset class. It doubled infrastructure investment and lifted agricultural output across the region. It also created a hierarchy where legal seniority now determines financial survivability. California locked that hierarchy in through the 1928 Boulder Canyon Project Act and the 1964 Supreme Court ruling in Arizona versus California, which secured 4.4 million acre-feet annually for the state, the most senior entitlement in the lower basin. Inside California, the 1931 Seven-Party Agreement pushed districts like the Palo Verde Irrigation District and the Imperial Irrigation District to the top of the priority order. In practice, that means junior rights holders get cut first, and the seniority of a water right now shapes the risk premium attached to every farm operation and every bank loan built on it. Those rights are not floating abstractions. They are legally appurtenant to the land itself, permanently fused to the title. Owning irrigated land in these regions means owning a legally guaranteed share of the Colorado River. That share underwrites 80 to 90% of the country's winter leafy greens, citrus, and salad vegetables. It also gets capitalized directly into land values. Senior, perfected water rights make farmland more valuable. Junior rights quietly inject a compounding financial risk that markets are only beginning to price honestly. The price distortion at the heart of the system is enormous. Irrigation districts can pay the Bureau of Reclamation as little as $30 per acre-foot, and sometimes zero. Nearly a quarter of all water diverted to lower basin agricultural districts arrives at no charge at all. The Imperial Irrigation District, the single largest user of Colorado River water, moves over 2.5 million acre-feet per year at a wholesale commodity cost of $0 per acre-foot. Municipal districts, by contrast, pay an average of $512. Private markets expose the true spread even more clearly. On the Colorado Front Range, water rights trade between $52,000 and $85,000 per acre-foot. That turns the pricing gap between agriculture and municipal demand into a 2,800 to 1 difference. The soil is no longer the whole investment thesis. The water right underneath it is. Wall Street understood that early. In 2018, Greenstone Resource Partners, backed by MassMutual and Rabobank, bought roughly 500 acres in Cibola, Arizona for $10 million. It fallowed the land, detached the associated 2,000 acre-feet of water rights, and sold them to the Phoenix suburb of Queen Creek for $24 million. Gross profit on that one transaction reached $14 million. Markets increasingly treat agricultural land as a temporary container for the senior water right below it. Meanwhile, 80% of diverted Colorado River water still goes to agriculture. Lower basin crops generate $814 per acre-foot in sales and net $485 after costs. Upper basin operations produce only $131 per acre-foot. The consumption profile is dominated by high-volume, low-margin forage. Alfalfa alone covered 2.7 million acres across basin states in 2022 and consumed over 2.15 trillion gallons to support 2.5 million cows on mega dairies that use 218 million gallons daily. Basin states already exceed the national average for irrigation water per acre by 70%, and Arizona uses more than 3 times the national rate. That is the backdrop for the collapse sequence. The first phase is margin compression. When federal surface water curtailments hit, farmers shift to groundwater pumping, and that means capital spending right away on deeper wells or new wells. Pulling water from 400 feet in Arizona uses approximately 759 kilowatt hours per acre-foot. At 15 cents per kilowatt hour, that means $114 in energy cost alone for every acre-foot pumped. Drop the water table another 100 feet and the bill rises again, while lower quality groundwater starts salting the soil and adding treatment costs on top. The second phase is liquidity drain. Farmers rush to banks for short-term operating credit just to keep planting acreage that was profitable a year earlier. By the fourth quarter of 2025, new farm operating loan volume was nearly 40% above the prior year, and average individual loan sizes had grown by 30%. In Pinal and Maricopa counties, acreage receiving payouts for irrigation supply failure rose from under 17,000 acres between 2016 and 2021 to over 41,000 in 2022, then nearly 59,000 by 2023. Across the basin from 2017 to 2023, the USDA paid over $5.6 billion in drought-related crop losses. The third phase is preemptive credit tightening. Lenders now run geospatial water risk tools over their portfolios, and pilot stress tests by major financial institutions show that a 3-month water curtailment can push more than 1/3 of exposed heavy water use borrowers from investment grade to speculative grade. Borrowing costs rise exactly when operators need capital most. Field reports say the same thing in plainer language. Once a farmer carries a short water designation, financing becomes extraordinarily difficult to secure. The fourth phase is collateral collapse. Take dependable water away from irrigated land, and 80 to 90% of the asset's value can disappear. During the 2001 Klamath River Basin curtailments, irrigated land that had traded between $2,200 and $2,800 per acre fell almost overnight to between $150 and $250. California's San Joaquin Valley has shown the same logic under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, where appraised values lost 60 to 70% within 5 years. Land that rose from $8,150 per acre in 2001 to more than $52,200 by 2021, an increase of over 530%, now faces structural retreat. Current estimates place between 500,000 and 1 million acres on track for permanent retirement from production. Pinal County, Arizona, is already living that future. The county sits in the top 2% nationally for cattle, milk, and cotton sales, and by 2016, its agricultural and agribusiness contribution reached $2.3 billion. But under the 2019 drought contingency plan, local agriculture sat at the very bottom of the priority order, with junior rights. When a Tier 2 shortage was declared in 2022, about 65% of the county's Colorado River allocation vanished. That meant roughly 300,000 acre-feet gone in one step. 65,000 acres left production. Gross agricultural revenue fell by $80.7 million, and the wider regional economy contracted by $30.7 million. 448 jobs disappeared, 209 on farms and 239 in support industries. Local tax revenue fell by $1.1 million, while farmers drilled emergency wells using $20 million in federal infrastructure funds that arrived too late. Some families saw the direction clearly and exited. They sold their ground to utility-scale solar developers, permanently removing that acreage from the agricultural tax base and from the farm credit system. One financial layer gives way, and the next one follows. Community banks sit closest to that blast radius. 1,372 specialized farm banks hold $212 billion in outstanding farm loans, equal to 35.7% of all agricultural lending in the country. Community banks alone hold nearly 70% of the sector total, or $127 billion. More than 220 of those banks have agricultural loan concentrations above 300% of their total capital. When a shortage declaration lands, it hits most of the bank's borrowers at once. That creates a double squeeze. Depositors pull cash to cover their own emergencies. At the same time, borrowers max out credit lines to survive. Liquidity drains from both sides of the bank balance sheet, and if the land underneath those loans is also losing water-backed value, the collateral cushion disappears just as the need for forbearance rises. That is how a hydrology problem becomes a banking problem. Municipal finance is next in line. Irrigation districts fund canals, dams, and pumping systems with bonds, and in 2016 alone, water communities issued nearly $38 billion in municipal bonds for infrastructure. The Central Arizona Project's 2025 rate schedule charges $295 per acre-foot for total delivery. Of that, $200 is fixed and billed on all scheduled water, whether it arrives or not, and $95 is the variable pumping energy charge. $40 from the fixed component goes straight to bond debt service, including $3.6 million annually on the 2016 revenue bonds. Once farmers start missing assessments, the district enters a classic utility death spiral. Fewer payers force higher rates, which squeeze the remaining payers and drive more defaults. S&P has already revised the outlooks on 20 California irrigation districts from stable to negative. And because the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act eliminated advance refunding for tax-exempt municipal bonds, the districts lost the main tool they once used to restructure debt during stress. The exposure is not limited to the American West. Research from the European Central Bank and the University of Oxford found that water scarcity already threatens approximately 15% of the euro area's economic output, with over 30% of bank lending exposed to highly water-vulnerable sectors. A municipal bond market that historically recorded only 47 to 71 defaults across decades is now facing a very different kind of risk. This is biophysical scarcity, not ordinary recession risk. The national farm economy makes the entire setup even more brittle. Chapter 12 farm bankruptcies rose 46% in 2025 to 315 cases. Net farm income is forecast at $153.4 billion in 2026, even as total farm sector debt hit a record $624.7 billion, and annual interest expense climbed to $33 billion. Direct government farm payments ballooned to $42.4 billion, equal to nearly 29% of bottom-line net cash farm income. The balance sheet looks rich, the cash flow does not. Sector equity is forecast at $3.92 trillion, but the rent-to-value ratio for U.S. cropland has fallen to an all-time low of 2.8%. Over the last decade, 54% of cropland total returns came from capital appreciation and only 46% from rental income. Asset turnover is sitting at 60-year lows of 0.14. Massive wealth on paper, and the sector cannot generate cash flow from it. This pattern is not new, only the driver is. Pecos River irrigation companies defaulted on bonds in the 1890s after flooding and drought wrecked the farms paying assessments. Early 20th century promoters inflated irrigation values, swapped those figures into district bonds, and later saw courts void the issues entirely. Credit that fueled the 1920s farm expansion became a weapon during the bust, with the most heavily lent-to counties suffering the sharpest land collapses and long waves of bank failures. Paul Volcker's rate hikes from 7% to over 18.5% in the early 1980s knocked farmland collateral down by a third nationwide, destroyed over 1,600 FDIC-insured banks between 1980 and 1994, and took Iowa half its family farms, along with 38 commercial banks. But this crisis carries one difference that matters more than all the others. Interest rates can be cut. Debt can be restructured. A depleted fossil aquifer cannot be restored by central bank policy or legislative decree. That is why the post-2026 operating rules are so important. They are not just a water management exercise. They are a live stress test for the entire financial architecture of the basin. Under the current proposals, lower basin states must collectively reduce use by 3.2 million acre-feet through 2028, including 760,000 for Arizona, 440,000 for California, and 50,000 for Nevada. The Bureau of Reclamation's draft environmental impact statement includes a supply-driven alternative that limits releases to 65% of natural flow. If strict prior appropriation is enforced, Junior Central Arizona project users lose 100% of their surface allocations overnight. Models project cumulative economic losses of $108 billion from 2027 to 2060, with wholesale water prices rising to $12,840 per acre-foot. The hydrology behind those models is even harsher. If river inflow falls to 39% of the historic average, Lake Powell reaches dead pool in 3.2 years. That would end both hydroelectric generation and controlled downstream deliveries. And the damage would cascade in a legal order, not a random one. Junior agricultural borrowers take the first hit. Rural supply chains fail next when equipment orders and fertilizer purchases stop. Community banks absorb the third shock as non-performing loans and collateral collapse arrive together. Irrigation district bondholders are fourth, once volumetric sales vanish while fixed costs remain. Farm credit system lenders come after that. Their geographic diversification and federal backing give them more room to survive, though not without stress. AgWest Farm Credit already reported a 127% year-over-year increase in its credit loss provision in early 2025. The federal government and the taxpayer remain the last backstop, covering crop insurance payouts, disaster aid, and conservation buyouts priced between $400 and $777 per acre-foot. Everyone else gets hit first. At this point, snowpack and runoff are no longer enough to measure the true condition of the Colorado River. The real indicators are financial: the widening spread between irrigated and dryland land values, the upward movement of delinquency rates across the farm credit system, and the swelling accounts receivable at municipal water districts. The financial system will reach dead pool long before the physical reservoirs do. And unlike a reservoir, once the credit dries up, there is no snowmelt that brings it back.